The hotel lamp threw a pale gold circle across the carpet, just enough light to catch the silk of my gown and the sharp edges of the garment bag draped over a chair. Air conditioning hummed against the June heat. When my phone rang, it lit the room in hard blue, my father's name stamped across the screen. I balanced the phone between shoulder and cheek and kept smoothing the dress fingertips slow, as if a steady touch could hold the night together. "America, we have a situation," he said, voice low apology baked into the first breath. There was a long second where I only heard the murmur of a television somewhere down the hall, the click of an elevator landing. Then he told me Jason's recreational team had made a divisional tournament unexpected, exciting the kind of thing that doesn't come around often anymore. "We think we need to support your brother," he added like a doctor delivering a practice diagnosis. "There will be other awards for you." Before I go on, tell me where you're listening from down in the comments. And if you've ever been treated like you didn't matter, when it mattered most, hit that like button and share this with the one friend who would have saved you a chair. To understand why that phone call cracked something I'd been repairing since childhood, you need to know the house where I learned to clap for everyone but myself. I grew up in the suburbs west of Chicago, a neighborhood of maple trees and basketball hoops mounted above garage doors. Dad's college trophies lined a shelf above our oak dining table, their brass figures forever rising for a shot. Mom kept the calendar by the fridge pinned with color-coded game schedules, carpool times, and reminders to bring orange slices. On Friday nights, the porch light burned late, a beacon for teammates who wandered in and out in socks and sweat. I tried everything they loved: Little League softball, soccer, a season of awkward basketball, where the ball felt like a stranger in my hands. The cheers were polite. The advice was plentiful. But numbers made a music all their own, and words felt like steady friends. I brought home spelling bee medals and math ribbons and laid them on the kitchen counter where they slid between grocery lists and a whistle on a lanyard. Mom smiled. Dad said, "Good job, kiddo," already glancing toward Jason's schedule taped to the freezer door. On my 10th birthday, I got exactly what I'd circled in a catalog: a sleek calculator and a big science encyclopedia. I carried them upstairs like treasure. That night, through the thin wall of my room, I heard my father tell my mother with a chuckle, "At least the geek stuff's cheaper than gear." The encyclopedia felt heavier in my hands. I fell asleep with the calculator against my chest and learned a truth I didn't have words for yet: a prize is only a prize if someone claps with you. By 6th grade, I stood on a school auditorium stage under buzzing lights and accepted a statewide math medal. Mrs. Peterson, the teacher who drove me, pressed the camera shutter and bought me a vanilla cone afterward. I ate it on a bench outside the gas station, legs swinging, pretending the cheering in the distance was mine. At home, the living room display case took in another of Jason's trophies. The medal from that night slid into my desk drawer beside a rubber band ball and a few pressed maple leaves. In high school, Miss Garcia called me out of the safe harbor of memorization. She taught me to question numbers until they told the truth. She handed me case studies like maps to rooms I hadn't known existed. When I got into a summer business program at Northwestern, she phoned my parents herself. "This isn't an after-school club," I remember her saying. "This is a door." They agreed reluctantly because she framed it like a season, just one summer, just a schedule. That summer, I found oxygen classrooms where curiosity was currency, where girls asked sharp questions and weren't handed softer answers. I came home with new vocabulary and a backbone that fit my frame. Senior year, I hid application drafts under my mattress and mailed them from the blue box by the library because Dad wanted me near sports management programs, and I wanted air that didn't smell like sweat and rubber floor. Wharton said yes. The envelope was thick and certain. The night before I left, Mom sat on my bed and said she was proud, even if it didn't always look like pride. The next morning, Dad hugged me by the driveway and warned me that the business world was full of sharks. If it gets too tough, you can switch to something more suitable. I slid behind the wheel of my used Honda and let the advice land without lodging. The highway east rolled out like permission. Philadelphia gave me a new dictionary of belonging. My roommate Olivia switched effortlessly between macroeconomics and Spanish slang. The guys across the hall had built an app in high school and treated failure like a lab note. I called home bursting to describe it to tell them about a professor who made supply chains feel like bodies with arteries. Mom listened, then shifted to Jason's preseason training plan, which drills were working how coach liked his three-point shot. So I learned to keep my good news for people who knew what to do with it. A first-year case competition win became dinner with friends who raised cheap glasses like they were crystal. A part-time role at a startup unfolded under the firm hand of Serena, who showed me the neat line where gut feeling meets evidence. I called home once to share that she'd praised a model I built. Dad answered on his way into a game. "Love you, kiddo. Tell me more later." Later had a way of turning into never. Thanksgiving that year, I counted minutes under the soft light of our dining room as the conversation looped around Jason's team chemistry. An old friend of Dad's asked what I was studying. I said it quickly. He nodded broadly and said, "Look at you taking the family's competitive drive into business. Same killer instinct, different court." Dad laughed and answered for me. "America's always been more of the academic type, different from the rest of us." I excused myself, washed my face under cold water, and learned how to re-enter a room with a steady smile. By graduation, I had a job offer in New York. My parents came. After the ceremony, Dad lifted his glass at a chain restaurant and said, "To America, always the smart one. You'll do just fine." The words were meant as blessing, but just fine echoed in the silverware and the air conditioning and stayed with me through the Lincoln Tunnel. New York is unforgiving and generous in the same breath. I rented a studio in Brooklyn whose windows rattled on windy nights. Every morning, I crossed the river with coffee in one hand and a notebook in the other. Innovative solutions took me in and threw me at problems that looked like fires from a distance. I didn't mind the heat. Victor noticed. He gave me projects with moving parts and let me build a way through them. Within 2 years, I was leading teams the youngest in a room more interested in outcomes than birthdays. When my methodology for supply chain optimization started doing more than hold up when it saved a few flailing contracts and made a few steady ones stronger, Victor shut his office door and slid a packet toward me. "We're nominating you for the Young Innovator Award," he said. "It's in Chicago." For a moment, the city on the lake felt like home again, not a museum built from other people's memories. I called my parents that night and let my voice be bright. They matched me a little. Mom asked if the event was black tie. Dad said we'd make a table of it, the family coming out cheering me on. I let myself believe him. I sent dress codes and flight details and hotel addresses. I pictured my mother's hand squeezing mine as my name was read. Pictured my father's smile, the old kind, when a ball fell through a net. 2 days before the ceremony, the phone lit the room in blue and I answered. "We think we need to support Jason," Dad said. His tone made it sound responsible, almost noble parents dividing attention in a difficult weekend, as if the scale hadn't been tipped for 20-plus years. "There will be other awards for you," he said again, filling the silence. "You're always achieving things." This might be his last chance to win something significant. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed and stared at the dress hanging from the closet's wooden hanger. The hallway went quiet. Somewhere down on the street, a horn bleated and faded. "The whole family?" I asked. "Your aunts and uncles are coming," he said, relief entering his voice, a decision decided. "We'll all be cheering Jason on." The word all hung in the air between us, bright as glass. "Don't be dramatic, America," he added quickly, as if he knew where my thoughts were going. "We'll take you to dinner next week." After the call, I stood as still as the dress. The city's light reached in around the edges of the curtains and painted a pale stripe across the carpet, the kind of light you only see along Lake Michigan in early summer. In it, the dust floated and turned unbothered. I took a picture of the award program on the desk and did not send it to anyone. The next evening, the ballroom smelled faintly of peonies and warm bread. A band tested the first notes of something smooth and old. Waiters set 2 wine glasses at each place, aligning silverware with quiet precision. My table held 6 chairs, and my name on a printed card that thrilled me and shamed me in the same breath. Around me, mothers smoothed collars, fathers shined lenses with shirt hems, friends traded their phones for real attention. A kind server looked at our empty seats and without a word lifted the extra place settings and carried them away. It should have been a simple subtraction, 3 chairs removed from a table, but the room tilted in that small motion. You notice the weight of absence most when someone is kind around it. I pressed my palms against my knees and set my shoulders back as if posture could hold in everything swelling behind my ribs. The MC announced dessert. The band softened. The lights narrowed to the stage. I listened to names and stories and applause, as if they were coming through a wall, as if I'd fallen just a few steps behind the crowd. When they called my name, hands found one another somewhere in the dark. I heard the rise of clapping a little stronger for someone local. I walked forward and felt the silk of my dress shift against my legs, the crystal of the award cool in my grip when they placed it there. At the microphone, I thanked Victor and Serena and the teams who had taught me how to be brave with a calculator. Words came like beads on a string in order with grace. I did not look toward the table where my family would have sat. I did not say their names. When the applause ended, the band lifted a bright chord, and I carried the award back through clusters of people leaning into their circles, heads close, laughter warm as lamps. I laid the crystal on the linen and traced its edge with one finger. My chair made a small sound as I pulled it in the kind of quiet that marks a decision. Past the ballroom doors, the hallway glowed in hotel light, steady and indifferent. Somewhere on a different set of bleachers, my family clapped for a 4th-place game that wouldn't change a single life. I took a breath that surprised me with how deep it was. Then I slid my phone into my clutch and stared at the 4 empty spaces on the carpet, where chair legs had pressed earlier that night, the absence pressed as neat as a seal. The band began another song. The room turned, and something in me long trained to wait my turn finally reached for the door. The night after the ceremony, the city outside my hotel window glowed with that strange mix of pride and loneliness only Chicago can manage. I sat on the edge of the bed, shoes still on dress wrinkled where I'd folded it to keep from crying. The award rested on the desk, catching the faintest shimmer from the streetlights below. It was beautiful, but it didn't feel like mine. Every time I looked at it, I saw those empty chairs instead of faces. When I finally sent the picture to my parents, there were no words. Just the award in frame and a silence heavy enough to fill the room. A while later, my phone buzzed a thumbs up from Mom, then a short text from Dad. Congratulations. Jason's team lost their first game, but won the second. Playing for 3rd place tomorrow. I put the phone face down and ordered room service, trying to make the night feel like something worth remembering. The waiter brought champagne and chocolate cake. I forced a toast, raised my glass toward the skyline, and told myself I was celebrating independence. But every sip burned a little. Every bite of cake felt too sweet. At some point after midnight, I turned off the lamp and stood by the window. From up here, the city looked endless, dotted with stories that didn't need anyone's applause to matter. I told myself I could learn to be one of them. And then quietly, I decided something that had been building for years. If I wasn't their priority, they wouldn't be mine either. The next morning, sunlight came through the curtains, like it had forgotten the night before. I packed slowly, folding the gown with care, as if gentleness might disguise the decision I'd already made. The room smelled faintly of roses from the centerpiece the staff had let me take. I left it on the nightstand when I checked out. Back in New York, my coworkers celebrated the award with the kind of enthusiasm my family never had. Victor called me into the conference room and raised a glass. Serena sent flowers with a card that said, "Recognition well earned." I smiled, thanked them all, and kept the details light. Nobody needed to know that the applause still echoed against a hollow wall inside me. Days passed, then weeks. The ache didn't fade, it only changed shape. At first, it looked like busyness. I worked longer hours, volunteered for projects that didn't need me, and filled my calendar until there was no room for thought. Then it became silence, the kind that hums behind every sound. My parents texted occasionally. Small things. How did the award thing go? Send pictures when you can. Jason's team got 4th place overall. I stared at the messages and couldn't bring myself to answer. It wasn't anger anymore. It was fatigue. Years of trying to be understood by people who didn't see the effort it took just to stand beside them. One morning, I took a walk along the East River before work. The air smelled like rain and salt. Runners passed with earbuds and faces turned toward their own mornings. I watched the water move steady and unbothered and realized I wanted that kind of peace. Not the brittle version that comes from pretending everything is fine, but the quieter kind that grows from letting go. When I called my parents later that week, my voice didn't shake. I told them what I'd rehearsed in my head for years. That missing the award ceremony wasn't just about scheduling it, was the final proof of something that had always been there. A pattern where Jason's games, Jason's needs, Jason's comfort came first, and I was the one expected to understand. Mom sounded surprised. "That's not fair, America. We've always supported both of you." "Differently," I said. "You've supported us differently." Dad jumped in defensive as ever. "You're blowing this out of proportion. We've never favored anyone. You're the one who left home early chasing your career. Don't twist this into something it's not." My hands trembled, but my voice didn't. "Can either of you name the last 5 things I've achieved? Because I can list every one of Jason's tournaments, his stats, even which ones you drove 6 hours for." The silence that followed was colder than I expected. Mom tried again, her voice softer this time. "We're proud of you, sweetheart. You've always been so capable, so independent." "That wasn't a choice," I said quietly. "I learned to be independent because I had to." Dad sighed. "You're being dramatic. Real achievement isn't about trophies. It's about character and family loyalty." That did it. The hypocrisy hit like a hard wind. "You filled the house with trophies that weren't mine," I said. "You built loyalty around who scored points, not who showed up." I'm done fighting for a seat in a house I helped hold together. When I hung up, my hands were shaking, but it wasn't fear. It was relief. For once, I hadn't tried to make them comfortable. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, wrote down a list of things I needed to change, and started with the hardest one. I changed my phone number. I blocked their emails, set new passwords, and locked every account that tied me to family addresses. Then I sent one final message to extended relatives, polite, simple, final. I was taking space for my mental health, and I asked them to respect that boundary. The quiet that followed was heavier than I expected, but it was clean. No waiting, no checking for messages that never came. Just stillness. Weeks turned to months. At first, I filled the space with work. Then, with things I'd never made time for: yoga in the park, reading for pleasure, long dinners with colleagues who felt more like friends. But holidays came like waves, and even peace has an undertow. Thanksgiving was the first real test. Olivia invited me to her family's dinner in Queens. Her parents welcomed me like I belonged, but somewhere between the laughter and the smell of roasted turkey, a hollow ache rose again. It wasn't longing for my parents. It was mourning the idea of them I'd carried for so long. On Christmas morning, I woke up alone in my apartment. Snow drifted past the window, soft and soundless. I made coffee, opened a few cards from coworkers, and found one from my parents' address. Inside was a gift card and a note in Dad's handwriting. Despite everything, you're still our daughter. I stared at it for a long time, then donated the amount to a literacy charity in Jason's name. It felt like symmetry. In January, I started therapy with a woman named Dr. Winters. She had silver hair and a voice that could have belonged to a choir teacher. Her office smelled faintly of cedar and tea. During the first session, she asked why I was there. I said I wanted to stop feeling like I was constantly trying to earn permission to exist. She didn't flinch. Over the next weeks, she taught me to notice the things I'd normalized, the way I apologized before offering ideas, how I smiled to smooth over tension, how I measured worth in productivity. What would it look like to celebrate your achievements because they matter to you, not because they might finally earn their attention? She asked once. I didn't have an answer, but the question stayed. By spring, the air had softened. I volunteered for a community dinner downtown, serving meals to anyone who came through the doors. The hall smelled of gravy and coffee, and the tables buzzed with voices that didn't know each other's histories but still shared space. An older woman at the end of the line squinted at my name tag and smiled. America, she said. Beautiful name, named after the country. My parents had big dreams, I said, handing her a plate. And did they come true? She asked. Some of them, I said, after a pause. The ones that were actually mine did. That night, I wrote again for the first time since college. Not about work or goals, just the truth of how it felt to stop chasing something that had never been waiting for me. The page filled quickly, messy and uneven, but alive. In the months that followed, I built what Dr. Winters called a chosen family. People who showed up because they wanted to, not because they were obligated. Victor and his wife started inviting me to Sunday dinners. Olivia moved to New York, bringing her easy laughter and too much red wine. Even a few colleagues who'd once seemed distant became friends once I stopped leading every conversation with credentials. Still, some nights, the silence found me again. I'd see families walking home from restaurants, or hear the echo of my father's voice in a stranger's tone, and the ache would slip back in. But it didn't own me anymore. It was just a reminder of the space I'd cleared for something better. On my birthday that summer, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was a framed photograph of two children building sandcastles on a lakeshore, Jason and me, maybe 8 and 11. The note was short. I miss my sister. I sat on the couch for a long time, the frame warm in my hands. I couldn't hang it on the wall, not yet, but I couldn't throw it away either. It went into the drawer of my nightstand beside an old medal and a calculator that still worked. That evening, the city lights came on one by one, flickering across the window pane like small promises. I stood there with the drawer half open, thinking about the difference between distance and abandonment, about how space can hurt and still heal at the same time. Somewhere in Chicago, my family's lives were still unfolding, probably around a dinner table full of game talk and small jokes. But for once, I didn't feel like I was missing from that picture. I felt like I was finally standing in my own. Outside, a light rain began, soft enough to mistake for static. I let the window stay open and listened. It sounded like the start of something quieter, steadier, something that might last. By late summer, the quiet that used to frighten me had become a kind of rhythm. Mornings began with the same ritual coffee, soft music, the sound of the city still half asleep outside my window. I'd leave early for the office, walking across the bridge as sunlight bounced off the East River, carrying both the noise of trucks and something that felt like hope. Work filled the days, and for the first time, I noticed how different it felt to build something for myself instead of running from something else. I'd stopped checking for messages that weren't coming. The space that used to ache was turning into room to grow. By autumn, that space had a shape, my own consulting practice. The idea had started months earlier as a quiet thought in the back of my mind. I'd caught myself daydreaming in meetings, sketching out business models in the margins of my notes. The Young Innovator Award had brought attention my way, potential clients, speaking invitations, quiet offers from investors who saw potential. One morning I sat across from Victor in his corner office and told him I was leaving. He leaned back, crossing his arms. "You're walking away from a partnership track," he said. "You sure about this?" I was. The words came calm and steady. "I need to see what I can build on my own." He studied me for a long time, then nodded. "Then, do it right. Make it yours." That evening, I took the long train ride home, the city rolling past, in gold and gray. By the time I stepped onto the platform, the decision had settled deep in my bones. I would build something small but honest work that carried my name, not someone else's shadow. The first months were a blur of late nights and quiet victories. My apartment's second bedroom turned into an office. The desk was a simple wooden one from a thrift store, and the whiteboard leaned against the wall instead of hanging. I bought a secondhand coffee maker that sputtered like it had opinions. Still, I loved every imperfection. 2 clients followed me from my old firm. A third found me through word of mouth. The work was steady, demanding, and alive. I'd spend hours tracing numbers on notepads, chasing patterns until they revealed what companies couldn't see in themselves. There was a thrill in that, turning chaos into order, fear into confidence. There were days I wanted to quit, nights when my laptop crashed, or when a pitch I'd poured weeks into went nowhere. Once I caught the flu the same week I had to run a workshop for a major client. I stood in front of that room, feverish and pale, talking through slides while my voice threatened to break. But the project landed, and that night back home, I looked around the apartment and felt something new: trust. Not in luck, not in approval. Trust in myself. Dr. Winters smiled when I told her that in our next session. Her office smelled of tea and pine that day, a candle burning on the shelf beside her. "You've spent most of your life proving," she said. "Now you're learning to simply be." It wasn't easy. Being meant slowing down, leaving space for silence, even for mistakes. She asked me once to introduce myself without mentioning my work. I stumbled. It felt like trying to walk without my own legs. So she gave me a new assignment: find something to do that has nothing to do with achievement. That's how I found the hiking group. Every Saturday morning, we'd drive out of the city, 10 or 12 of us, with mismatched backpacks and thermoses of coffee. The first few weeks, I mostly listened. Out there, no one cared about titles or resumes. People talked about books, old houses, the smell of pine after rain. Somewhere between those trails and the quiet of the woods, I realized how much of my life had been lived at full volume. After one hike, I lingered near the trailhead with Eliza, the group leader. She was a literature professor with weathered hands and a way of speaking that made you listen. "You seem different than when you first joined," she said, tightening the strap on her pack. "More here, less somewhere else." "I'm practicing being instead of proving," I said, and she smiled as if she already knew. The group became my weekend anchor, a reminder that I was more than numbers and deadlines. Through them, I met Michael, a high school history teacher who always carried a notebook filled with quotes he found meaningful. He had a calm presence, like someone who'd made peace with the things he couldn't control. We started with small conversations about books and the trails we wanted to try next. On our third hike, the group stopped for lunch near a clearing. He asked if I'd ever been to the Catskills in fall. I said no. He smiled. "You should. The leaves there make you think the world's on fire, but it's just changing." When we finally went months later, he wasn't wrong. The hills rolled out in gold and rust, and the air carried the scent of pine needles. We walked for hours, talking about small things, music, food, the comfort of routine. That night, we stopped for dinner at a small diner off the highway. He asked about my work, and I reflexively launched into details until he raised a hand, gentle but firm. "I'd love to hear about your projects," he said, "but tell me about you. What do you do when you're not fixing everyone else's problems?" The question disarmed me. I laughed, quiet and real. "I'm still figuring that out." Michael didn't rush to fill the silence. He just nodded, letting the moment breathe. It felt like exhaling after years of holding it in. Work continued to grow alongside this new rhythm. 6 months into running my firm, I leased a small office near Union Square. 2 rooms, big windows, a door with my name on the glass. "Seeing America Taylor." Consulting etched there the first morning felt like touching solid ground after a long swim. The business began to draw attention. A trade journal requested an interview about my approach to sustainability and analytics. Then one of my case studies was published in an industry review. The attention felt different now, lighter, less like a spotlight, and more like sunlight through leaves. One afternoon, I got an email from a reporter who was gathering profiles for Forbes' 30 Under 30 feature. They wanted to include my firm as part of a section on sustainable innovation. I stared at the message for a long moment before replying. The process took weeks: interviews, data checks, calls with clients who spoke on my behalf. When the photographer arrived, he asked how I wanted to be portrayed. "Authentic," I said. "No power pose, no skyscrapers. Just me doing the work." He nodded, setting up the lights. We took the photo in my office as I stood by the whiteboard, sleeves rolled up, marker still in hand. When I saw the final image, I barely recognized myself. Not because I looked different, but because I looked calm. There was no strain in my eyes, no need to prove. As the publication date approached, part of me felt the old tug, the urge to share the news with my family. I'd been out of contact for nearly a year. Some nights I'd wonder how they were doing, if Mom still kept the same calendar on the fridge, if Dad still watched local games with Jason. I brought it up in therapy. "It's natural to want to share achievements with people who knew you first," Dr. Winters said. "The question is whether doing so would heal you or reopen a wound." I thought about it for days. Then I realized I didn't need their acknowledgement anymore. What I wanted was to honor the part of me that used to believe I'd never be enough. When the magazine finally came out, my team surprised me with champagne and a cake topped with an edible version of the cover photo. They sang off key and laughed when I rolled my eyes. Michael arrived with a bouquet of wildflowers and that same quiet smile. He kissed my cheek and said, "You did this for the right reasons." That evening, as the office lights dimmed and the last of the laughter faded, I stood by the window looking out over the city. 1 year ago, I'd sat alone at an empty table in Chicago, surrounded by silence that felt endless. Now, the room behind me hummed with warmth and voices that chose to be there. I lifted my glass more in gratitude than celebration. "This," I said softly, "belongs to all of us." The next morning, I bought a single copy of the magazine from a newsstand on the corner. I slipped it into my bag, not as a trophy, but as proof that growth can be quiet. I didn't know that 200 miles away in a dentist's waiting room, my brother was about to pick up that same issue and see my face staring back at him. In the photo, I looked composed and confident, hands mid-gesture, explaining something on a whiteboard. I didn't know that he'd dropped the magazine in shock, or that the receptionist asked if he was all right. I didn't know that within hours, a photo of that page would be sitting on my parents' kitchen table, the same table where Jason's trophies once stood, and where my name had rarely been spoken. All I knew was that the sun was climbing through the glass of my office window, scattering light across the desk. The phone buzzed with messages from colleagues, friends, and clients. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was running toward recognition or away from rejection. I was exactly where I belonged, and something in the world had quietly begun to shift without me forcing it. Outside, the morning traffic moved in its familiar rhythm. I took a breath, set the magazine aside, and got back to work, unaware that far away the story I thought was over was finding its way back to me. The week the Forbes issue came out, I barely noticed. My days were full of client meetings, project calls, and the steady hum of growth that filled my small firm. I'd glance at the magazine sometimes, just one copy on the edge of my desk, but it already felt like something that belonged to an earlier version of me. Then one quiet afternoon, as the light slanted across the office floor, Olivia walked in holding her phone. "You're not going to believe this," she said, handing it to me. The screen showed a message from Jason. He'd tracked her down through a mutual connection. I stared at the words for a long moment. "I saw you in Forbes. I'm sorry we weren't there for your award ceremony. I'm sorry for a lot of things. Can we talk? Just me?" No pressure. My first instinct was to close the phone and walk away. But the message lingered like the sound of a familiar voice at the end of a long hallway. I wasn't angry anymore, not exactly, just cautious. That night, I took the subway home in silence. The city felt louder than usual, honking horns' voices spilling out of cafes, the steady rhythm of shoes on pavement. I thought about how strange it was that someone could miss you for years and still find a way back through a magazine page. At home, I set my bag down and poured a glass of water. The apartment was still the only sound, the low hum of the refrigerator. I reread Jason's message, this time slower. He hadn't asked for forgiveness. He'd asked for a conversation. There was a difference. The next day, I brought it up during my session with Dr. Winters. "I don't know if I'm ready," I said. She nodded thoughtfully. "Boundaries aren't walls," she said. "Sometimes they're gates. The key is deciding who gets to open them and when." Her words stayed with me all week. I thought about the years between us, the silence, the patterns we'd both grown inside of. By the weekend, I'd made a decision. I wrote back simply, "I'm open to talking. Just us. No expectations." We agreed to meet at a small coffee shop in Chicago during my next business trip. The place was quiet, all soft jazz, and wooden tables worn smooth by years of conversation. I arrived early, choosing a corner seat near the window. Outside, snow drifted in slow spirals, blurring the world to gray. When Jason walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. His hair was shorter, his face leaner. He looked older in a way that had nothing to do with age. We shook hands instead of hugging, a gesture both formal and uncertain. The first few minutes passed with small talk, the weather, my flight, his work. Then came a silence that neither of us could escape. Finally, he exhaled. "I've practiced what to say 100 times," he said. "But none of it sounds right." "Just say what you mean," I told him. "That's all I've ever wanted." He nodded and stared down at his coffee. "I'm sorry, America, for the awards ceremony, for all the times before that, for not seeing how unfair it was." His voice wavered. "I thought we were just a normal family. I didn't realize what normal looked like for you. I hadn't expected the honesty." It landed quietly, like the sound of snow against glass. "What made you realize it?" I asked. He gave a small, almost embarrassed laugh. "The Forbes article. Seeing you there reading about what you've built, it made me think about everything I took for granted. About how I always assumed you were fine because you seemed strong." I let his words sink in. For years, I'd dreamed of hearing an apology, rehearsing what I might say. But now, sitting across from him, I felt less triumph than tenderness. You were the center of everything I said softly. I don't blame you for it. But it hurt to be invisible. Jason nodded, eyes glistening. I know, and the worst part is, I think I liked being the center. I didn't ask for it, but I didn't refuse it either. We sat there for hours, unraveling old stories, filling in missing details of our childhood that had once felt one-sided. He told me how after my silence, he'd started noticing things, how Mom's house was still filled with his trophies, how Dad brought up his games like they were still happening. I realized, he said quietly, you had to fight for what they handed me. When we finally stood to leave, I felt the weight of something shifting, not erasing the past, but making room for something new. At the door, Jason hesitated. They want to see you, he said, but I told them I wouldn't bring it up unless you wanted that. It's your call. I looked past him at the street where the snow was beginning to melt. Maybe, I said, just not all at once. 2 weeks later, I met my mother at the same cafe. She arrived early, her hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched. When she saw me, she stood too quickly, almost knocking it over. You look wonderful, she said, eyes glistening. So professional, so grown up. I am grown up, I said gently, taking the seat across from her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she sighed. When I saw that article, it broke something in me. I realized what we'd missed. What I missed. Her fingers trembled against the ceramic. I was so caught up in being Jason's mother that I forgot to be yours. The words came haltingly, but they were real. I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. You always said I was independent, but that wasn't a choice. It was survival. She nodded, tears spilling freely now. I know. And I can't undo it, but I want to understand you. I want to know you as you are now. That afternoon, we talked longer than I expected. She asked about my work, about New York, about the people who'd filled the spaces she'd once left empty. When we parted, she hugged me so tightly, I could feel her heart racing against mine. For the first time in years, I didn't pull away. A week later, I met my father. He suggested a walk in the park, a place where words could move with us instead of sitting heavy in the air. The snow had melted into patches of damp earth. We walked side by side, the sound of our shoes crunching on gravel. He spoke first. You've done well for yourself, he said, as if commenting on the weather. I worked hard, I replied. He nodded. Always did. There was a long pause. I never understood your world. Basketball made sense to me. Points, wins, losses. What you do, it felt abstract. I didn't know how to be proud of something I didn't understand. You could have tried, I said quietly. He stopped walking and turned to me. I know, and I'm sorry for missing that night, for not seeing you. The apology was clumsy, but it was his. It sounded like effort, not habit. Thank you, I said, and meant it. We continued walking. The wind had picked up, rustling the bare branches above us. After a while, he said, Your mother says you're happy. I am, I said, but it took distance to get there. He nodded. I don't want to lose that distance if it's what keeps you at peace. But I hope someday it doesn't have to be there. His honesty disarmed me more than any apology could. For the first time, I saw not the man who'd chosen my brother over me, but someone struggling to learn a new language late in life. Reconnection didn't happen in a rush. It came in small, deliberate steps, scheduled calls, short visits, gentle corrections when old patterns resurfaced. When Dad slipped back into comparing me to Jason, I stopped him. This isn't competition, I'd say. It never was. Slowly, they began to understand. Mom started asking about my business, not just if I was eating well, Dad read articles I sent him, even quoting lines back during our calls. Jason and I found a rhythm that felt more like friendship than obligation. 6 months later, my parents came to New York for the first time. I met them at the airport watching as they stepped off the escalator, eyes wide and a little unsure. At my office, Mom asked thoughtful questions about projects. Dad ran a hand over the plaque on my door as if confirming it was real. That evening, we had dinner at a small Italian restaurant near the park. The light was warm, the music low. Dad raised his glass. "To America," he said. "Not just smart, but visionary. We see you now." The words landed softly, not as grand gestures, but as quiet truth. I didn't cry, though. I felt something loosen deep inside. We lingered over dessert, talking about small things, the city lights, the taste of the wine, how strange it was that time could both wound and heal in the same breath. When I walked them back to their hotel, the air smelled of rain and spring. Mom squeezed my hand and whispered, "I'm proud of you." I believed her this time. That night, I stood on my balcony watching the city shimmer. The skyline stretched endless and alive, and somewhere far below, I could hear laughter from the street. The sound wasn't mine alone anymore, but it didn't have to be. For the first time in years, peace didn't feel like a distant idea. It felt like a home I'd built, one boundary, one choice, one act of forgiveness at a time. And as the wind brushed past, I had the quiet sense that the story between us wasn't ending, it was beginning again, finally on equal ground. Morning sunlight spilled across my living room floor, slow and gold, the kind of light that doesn't hurry anyone. The city was still half asleep, the faint echo of traffic drifting from the avenue below. I stood barefoot by the window, coffee in hand, watching a world that finally didn't feel like something I had to conquer. It was enough just to belong to it. Months had passed since my parents' visit. We still spoke, but carefully, like two gardeners tending a fragile new seedling. Calls every few weeks, short and steady. Sometimes, Mom would send an article about business she didn't fully understand, but I could tell it came from love. Dad mailed a book once, Leaders Eat Last, his way of showing he was trying. I never expected perfection. Consistency was enough. Jason and I had found something close to friendship. We talked more often now, usually on Sundays. He asked about my projects, told me about the local team he coached, about kids who reminded him of both of us, ambitious, uncertain, still learning what they were worth. When he spoke about them, I could hear the change in his voice, softer, humbled. "You were right," he said one night over the phone. "It's not about who wins. It's about who shows up." Michael had moved in by then. His presence brought a different kind of quiet, warm, not empty. He had a way of grounding every room, filling it with a calm that made time slow down. Our lives fit together with an ease that still surprised me. Some nights, we'd cook dinner and leave the radio low voices blending with the sound of rain against the window. He never asked about the years I'd spent chasing validation. He only cared about the woman standing in front of him now. At work, things had grown beyond anything I'd planned. The firm had doubled in size. I'd hired new analysts, bright, thoughtful people who cared about purpose as much as profit. Olivia managed our biggest accounts with the same empathy she'd shown me since college. And every Friday afternoon, we'd hold what we jokingly called gratitude rounds. No slideshows, no numbers, just stories about what had gone right that week, even the small things. I had once believed success was a mountain with no summit. But now, I saw it as a garden, something to tend, not conquer. Each project, each person who came through my door, was a seed that could grow into something good if nurtured with care. Dr. Winters liked that metaphor. During one of our final sessions, she smiled and said, It sounds like you've built a life that feeds you back. I told her I finally understood what she meant by being instead of proving. There was no audience left to impress. The only approval I sought was peace. That fall, I flew to Chicago again, not for business, but because Mom had invited me home. No pressure, she'd said. Just dinner. Jason will grill, and your father's promised to stay out of the kitchen. Her voice had held a tremor of nervous excitement, like someone reaching for a bridge they'd never crossed before. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The front yard, once dominated by Jason's basketball hoop, now had flower beds, Mom's new hobby, she explained. Inside the living room walls were the same shade of cream, but something was different. The shelf of trophies was gone. In its place stood framed photographs Jason's team mom at a charity event and one of me at a business conference. Not the Forbes cover, just a candid shot I'd sent her months ago, laughing mid-sentence. It wasn't pride on display anymore. It was balance. Dinner was easy, almost ordinary. Jason told a story about one of his players who'd mixed up sneakers and ended up playing in 2 left shoes. Mom laughed so hard she cried. Dad grilled too much food as always, then insisted we take leftovers home. Later, as we cleared the table, he stopped me by the doorway. You know, he said, when I was your age, I thought winning was everything. Now I think it's this, seeing my kids happy, seeing your mother relaxed for once. He hesitated, searching for the right words. I don't expect us to erase the past, but I'd like to keep earning a place in your present. I looked at him, his weathered hands the silver at his temples, and felt something unclench in my chest. You already have, I said. Just keep showing up. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone on the back porch. The air smelled of grass and wood smoke. Fireflies blinked lazily over the lawn. For the first time in that house, I didn't feel like a visitor or a stranger. I felt like myself, whole at ease, belonging to no one's expectations but my own. The next morning, before leaving for the airport, Mom handed me a small box. Inside was the calculator she'd found while cleaning the attic, the one I'd clutched as a child after that long-ago birthday. I almost threw it out, she said softly. But then I thought, maybe it's part of what built you. I smiled. It is, I said. Thank you for keeping it. On the flight home, clouds stretched below like endless fields of cotton. I held the calculator in my hands and thought about all the things I'd once used it to escape equations, problems, the neatness of numbers when people felt too complicated. Now it was just a reminder that clarity was something I'd always carried inside me, waiting to be trusted. When I landed, Michael was there leaning against a pillar holding a paper cup of coffee for me. How was it, he asked. Good, I said. Strange, but good. He smiled, and we walked toward the exit together. The evening air outside the terminal smelled of rain and jet fuel. Somewhere in the distance, a plane lifted off lights disappearing into gray. In the weeks that followed, life returned to its quiet rhythm. Work dinners, laughter, ordinary mornings. I didn't need grand gestures or apologies anymore. What mattered was the steady hum of contentment that wove through everything I did. Every so often, I'd find myself sitting at my desk after everyone else had gone, watching the city turn to evening through the window. The lights came on one by one, tiny constellations scattered across glass and steel. I'd think about how far I'd come from that girl sitting alone at a table meant for 6. She had wanted so badly to be seen. I wished I could tell her that one day she would be, and not because anyone finally looked up, but because she learned to stand where the light found her naturally. Last month, my parents sent a photograph in the mail. The 3 of them, Mom, Dad, and Jason, standing together in front of a small banner that read, Community Sports Scholarship Fund. They'd started it in my honor for students who balanced athletics and academics. In the note, Mom wrote, we thought it was time to cheer for all kinds of champions. I placed the photo in a frame on my desk beside a picture of my team at the office and another of Michael and me on a hiking trail. 3 parts of the same story, family by blood, family by choice, and the life I built between them. The balance isn't perfect. It probably never will be. But perfection was never the goal. Peace was. And I have that now, quietly and completely. Outside my window, dusk gathers in shades of silver and blue. The street below glows in reflections from rain-slick pavement, and the air smells faintly of the sea. I breathe it in and let it fill every empty space I once tried to hide. Some wounds don't fade because we forgive. They fade because we finally let go. If this story spoke to you, tell me where you're listening from. I'd love to know. And if you've ever had to choose peace over approval, share your journey in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories about quiet strength, second chances, and the kind of healing that takes time. Thank you for listening. I wish you calm days, honest hearts, and a peace of your own.